Welcome back, friends. I'm Yvonne Davis, author, astrologer, and life transformation coach. And right now, today, I'm bringing you a video about the upcoming astrological alignments for the week of March 16th. So, first of all, we have a lot of really favorable alignments this week. We have several trines and sextiles. So I want to mention them. And by the way, if you're ever interested in being able to find out what the alignments are each day, I use this. It's Llewellyn's Daily Planetary Guide, and it's really helpful. It tells you, so you can see every day, it tells you what is happening astrologically, and I like to highlight the ones that I think are favorable. So we've got some really good alignments pretty much all day on Monday and definitely all day on Tuesday. And we've got a Jupiter moon conjunction on Wednesday, and that starts at 6:47 a.m. on the East Coast. And then we've got a moon sextile to the sun. So there are some favorable aspects that day, but the moon is also conjoining Pluto and Saturn that day, and that might be a little bit challenging. And then we have the Mars-Jupiter conjunction on Friday, which for the most part is a good alignment. It can give you energy because Jupiter expands the Mars energy. And so that warrior energy to get things done can be expanded. And then we also have good energy on Saturday the 21st. And that is also the day that Saturn enters Aquarius in the evening. And then we have good energy all day on Sunday the 22nd, except at the very end at 10:21 p.m. Pacific time, Mars and Pluto conjoin. And so what I want to say, because all of this is happening in the context of the, CV expansion, I have to be very careful about the words that I use. And so we're doing our best, to make our lives work, make our lives better in the context of this experience. And so the question is, like, how well are you doing? I really want to know. I would very much like it if you would leave comments for me below that talk about, are you being impacted by it in any way personally? And if so, how is it impacting you? Are you changing your behavior? And if so, how are you changing your behavior? And then also the impact on the stock market. And so I'm curious if it's impacting any of you on a personal level, either the stock market or any economic repercussions. I'm self-employed and I don't have anything in the stock market, so I don't feel, obviously, whenever there is an economic downturn, everybody's impacted except the extremely wealthy. And so, I am being impacted, but in different ways than other people. I don't have any money in the stock market. I chose a long time ago. I tried it a couple times and it was just too nerve-wracking for me. So I decided a long time ago to get out, and I never went back in. And I'm a much happier person because I don't get impacted by it in any way, shape, or form. It's just like, it's like watching a reality TV show for me personally, but I know that's not true of other people. So I'm curious to know if you personally are being impacted by it, either through what's happening to the stock market, or if it's having any economic repercussions. Are you experiencing it directly? That's what I want to know, because I know a lot of you, your lives are different from mine. You may have money in the stock market, you may be retired, or you may be working in a job where you feel vulnerable. So I would like to know so that I can understand what's happening out there amongst my viewers and how you're being impacted by this. And then we can look at the alignments in the context of what is happening right now, because these are short-term transits that are happening in the midst of a long-term fundamental shift that we've been expecting for a long time. You know, it's interesting with astrology because a lot of times, you know, when you're making videos or astrologers are writing articles or things like that, they're talking about the short-term transits because that's what people see. But in effect, what's happening are things that were set in motion months ago. As an example, when Uranus moved into Taurus, and I think it's been there for a year now, and we've been talking, astrologers were talking about it a year ago, saying that it was going to bring changes to the stock market and to the economy and to our financial institutions. And sure enough, we're starting to see the first phase of that now unfolding. And also we talked about the the Pluto-Saturn conjunction at the time of the full moon eclipse on January 10th, and even going further back to the new moon eclipse on December 26, 2019. Now, you know, but as we say, it takes about 6 months for eclipses to fully unfold. It's like hitting a domino and then it clicks it off. And so we're now beginning to see more and more of the effects of the Pluto-Saturn conjunction and those two eclipses in December 2019 and January 2020. So again, it's showing us the fundamental weaknesses in our system. And once those are brought into our awareness, then it can bring about the transformation of power and structure, the structure of power and authority, okay? That happens at the level of the government, and it will still take time. It doesn't happen overnight. The whole unfolding will take at least a year. And also to our health system and other forms of infrastructure and the stock market and the economy. So we're actually seeing it now. And but these things have been in motion for months now. And again, Uranus has, I think, been in Taurus for about a year now. So the fact that we're just now starting to see the actual ramifications, because what you need to understand is even the impeachment trial, well, the impeachment process itself and then the impeachment trial, even though a lot of people think, well, that went nowhere, but that's not true. That's just one domino falling that will actually ultimately have repercussions that we may not see for another year, because once the new government comes into effect in early January 2021, and the new president is inaugurated on January 21st, 20th? Yeah, I think it's January 20th, 2021, then we will begin to see the changes coming about that will restore or correct the weaknesses and the faults that have shown themselves in the past 4 years, and certainly in the past year. So keep that in mind, that the alignments that I'm talking about and the days that I'm talking about, those are some really good alignments, and yet they're happening in the context of this long-term transit. So, and the long-term transits of the outer planets and also of the eclipses. And so the one thing I really want to bring your attention back to is the fact that at the end of the week, this is, again, is the week of March 16th, at the end of the week when we reach Saturday and Sunday, that's when we get to Saturday, March 21st, when Saturn will move into Aquarius. And then at the end of the day on Sunday, the 22nd, Mars and Pluto will conjoin. And I think that the Mars-Pluto conjunction is very, very tricky because of the fact that it can bring a lot of things. Let me go ahead and bring up a chart. Hold on. Okay, I'm going to bring up that Mars-Pluto conjunction so that we can see, get a little more information from this. Now, on the Pacific coast, it happens late in the evening, and then across the United States, it'll be midnight and then 1:21 a.m. on the East Coast when Mars conjuncts Pluto exactly. So let's take a look at what's happening when they make their exact conjunction. So again, I really, really need to emphasize that the alignments will do different things in different people's charts. So you can't assume that just because I'm doing this reading for the nation, that means that that's what's going to happen to you personally, because it absolutely depends on where it's landing in your chart. If you have a lot of earth and water planets, then it can be making trines and sextiles, which are favorable. As a matter of fact, Venus in her home sign of Taurus is making a trine to Jupiter, Pluto, and Mars. So she is giving us some beneficial energy from that. So a lot of people are actually going to benefit from this. So keep that in mind. You can't assume that that it's all going to be bad news for you. Okay, and it's also these two with the Venus and the Jupiter, Pluto, Mars, they're sextiling Neptune and the moon. So that's actually very favorable. Okay, so what we want to say about this, however, is that Pluto is power, wealth, money, but also rules death and transformation. And Mars is the warrior god. Mars is the planet of action. Sometimes when you put Pluto, the god of death, and mix it up with Mars, the god of war, because he's a warrior god, and he's all about fire. And since we're in the midst of the CV expansion, that's my code word, the combination of Pluto and Mars could be really challenging at this time, okay? So again, with Mars being the god of death and, Pluto being the god of death and Mars being the god of war, which is also fire and violence, and it rules inflammation, infection, fever. So the combination there can be very potent and even dangerous. And then it's being magnified and expanded by Jupiter. And Jupiter is also the globetrotter. So it's making waves around the world. And so I think that you just have to do the best you can to protect yourself. There's no getting out of this. It's, once something is set in motion, it has to run its course, and there's just nothing we can do about that. I'm going to continue to include 3 videos that I found that talk about the science behind this and the timeline for a vaccine. And so until that arrives, we have to rely on either social isolation or our own immune system. And I know for a lot of people, they may not feel secure with that alone. And yet that's all we have at our defense at this moment. So you got to do your best to protect yourself and keep your immune system healthy. And then in terms of the stock market and the economy, I think just based on the alignments for the week of March 16th, it may bounce back or even stabilize a little bit. And we may have seen the worst of it for at least a week. But something, I think, because of this conjunction of Mars, Pluto, and Jupiter at the end of the week, I think when we get to Monday, March 23rd, the news will report a jump in the numbers, and that may lead to the stock market taking another dive. So there's a little bit of a delayed response. That's my prediction based on the transits. That next week may stabilize a little bit in terms of the stock market. But then with the Mars, Pluto, Jupiter conjunction at the end of the week around midnight, when Sunday is crossing into Monday, on Monday we'll find out that the numbers jumped, and that will have an impact on the stock market, and that will follow suit, which we will probably see on Wednesday or Thursday, and then it will stabilize again on Friday the 27th, and of course over the weekend since the stock market is closed. So if you don't have anything in the stock market, then you have no cause for anxiety where that's concerned. Or if you're one of those people who you're the long-term investor, you put it in and you don't think about it anymore, then you're fine too. So I don't invest in the stock market, so because I don't have the personality for it. It's just too stressful for me. But of course, it may have impacts on the overall economy as well. And I do kind of want to mention something that has been on my mind lately regarding these issues, because, you know, the news is always raising the alarm about global warming and things like that. And I've often wondered how. So first they'll raise the alarm about global warming, which is, you know, scientifically true, that there is, you know, there is an effect on the global climate, and that it has been shown to be related to human activity in a cause and effect relationship. And then, you know, a lot of people think we need to do something about that. I don't normally talk about global warming and global climate change on my channel because I prefer not to step into that political morass. But I'm not doubting the science, absolutely not doubting the science. So the question really is, what are we going to do about it? And what I've always found confusing is that they'll raise the alarm about global climate change, but then if there's an economic downturn, they raise the alarm about that. And so the problem is that these two are contradicting each other, because if economic expansion and population expansion are what are causing, apparently, you know, this is what they say, this is what science actually says, is that it's human activity that is leading to global climate change, then these two are contradicting each other. Do you see what I'm saying? Because they raise the alarm if there's any economic downturn. Like, we cannot have economic downturn. We have to constantly be growing our economy, growing. And that means growing and increasing consumption. And at the same time, you know, I recently saw an article in the Washington Post that was talking about how the birth rate in the US is dropping, and it hasn't dropped to zero. I mean, population replacement, that's zero growth rate. But it's slowed down. I think it's like 0.7. So it's not at zero. In other words, we haven't stabilized our population. We're still growing our population. It's just slowed down. So it's slowed down to 0.7, but it hasn't stopped. It hasn't gone to zero, meaning replacement, meaning stabilized population. So we're at around 330 million. So that would mean stabilizing at 0 population growth rate would be, we would just stay at 330 million. And they were raising alarms saying that 0.7, which is a reduction in the growth rate, which is based on the birth rate, was a terrible thing. But not to worry, because the immigration is making up for it. So even though birth rates in the US have slowed down, again, we're not at 0 population growth rate in the US. We're at 0.7, but that is bolstered by immigration. So in other words, the birth rate has not reached a 0 population growth rate. It's at 0.7. But our population growth rate isn't actually slowing either, because immigration is making up for it. So I couldn't understand, like, what are they so, I did not understand what the Washington Post was trying to raise the alarms about. It's like, I don't get it. We have, our population is still growing, both through the birth rate and through immigration. So I didn't understand why they were freaking out about the slowing population growth rate or the slowing birth rate. I just, again, it's not even to 0, it's at 0.7. It's just, and that's just the birth rate. That's not even including immigration. So I really did not get it. Maybe some of you understand why they're so, why the Washington Post would be writing this editorial trying to get us concerned about the slowing population growth rate that's not really even slowing. I don't get it. Maybe you can explain it to me. So I'm certainly not concerned about it. I think we've got plenty of people and our population is still growing. I just don't understand how they I don't understand why they raise the alarm about slowing population growth rate that's not really slowing. And they raise the alarm about slowing economic growth rates, but they then, on the other hand, raise the alarm about global climate change, because the only way to truly address global climate change is to slow the population growth rate, which means slowing the birth rate and slowing economic growth rates. I mean, I don't see any other way around it. So I'm really perplexed by that. Maybe some of you viewers out there understand that and can share with me, like, how do you bring those two ideas together? How do we continue to grow our economy and continue to consume and continue to grow our population? And I'm talking about the birth rate, not immigration, because I think these are two separate issues. One I see as more of a political issue, whereas the other is like biological, in the sense that babies are being born. So whereas the other one's political because it's about the political public policy, about how many people can be allowed in and so on and so forth. So these are two separate issues. But regardless, I don't see how we can bring those two ideas together if they're contradicting each other. But maybe you understand it differently than I do. So if you do, please leave comments. I really do want to try to make sense of this. So, so that was a little different than the normal kind of videos I do, but I just, I feel like it's almost like the world is turned upside down. Like the world that we're living in right now today feels very, very different than the world we were living in just prior to Mercury retrograde. And there's something about this recent Mercury retrograde that really turned the world upside down. And so we'll see when Mercury finishes its the shadow and passes by Neptune and gets out of Pisces and moves into Aries. I think things will be very different again. And same with the transit of Uranus into, Saturn into Aquarius. I think that things will be very different. And new information is constantly coming coming up to the surface, for us to understand what's really going on, and again, what the weaknesses are in our system that need to be addressed. So this is one that I'm bringing up. This is a question I'm posing for you, my viewers. So I'm hoping to get a lot of comments from this video. I want to know, is the CV impacting you personally? And if so, how? And what protective measures are you taking? And secondly, is the stock market or economy, the changes in the stock market and economy, are they having a effect on you personally? And if so, what is it? And then thirdly, the question I have is, does it make sense to you that we can continue to push for, just this full steam ahead economic growth and consumption, and continuing to expand the population growth rate? Again, I'm talking more about through the birth rate as opposed to immigration, because I mean, you can mention immigration too. It's just that those are people who are still on the planet, who are already on the planet. They're just moving across borders. I'm talking about like bringing new people into the world and expanding not only our increasing our birth rate, but also, and population growth rate, but also adding to the overall global birth rate and population growth rate. So, and how do we hold that in relationship to issues of global climate change and the impact of global climate change, and not just that, but like depletion of the environment. I mean, you could go on and on and on and on with that. Forests being cut down, oceans being overfished, the deforestation and desertification and loss of topsoil. And I mean, you could just go on and on and on and on and on listing the impact, not to mention garbage in the ocean. And, it's just all of these different variables related to the environment, they seem to worsen with the increase of consumption. That's fundamentally what it is, because the two things, the population growth rate and economic growth rate, are pushed forward or have an impact because of consumption. So in other words, I don't know how you can have continuing economic growth without continuing consumption. Same with, based on increasing population, that's also increasing consumption. I just don't know any other way around it. So I don't know how we bring these two things together. Okay, so maybe you do. And if you do, then that's my third question that I would love for you to mention and answer in the comments. So I hope we get some really good discussion going around this, because this is what it's really, really all about. I love doing the astrology readings. I think of that fundamentally as pattern recognition and seeing the cycles that we can see in the sky and how they mirror the cycles unfolding on Earth. But what we really need to do is start looking at these fundamental weaknesses in our system, getting accurate information, trying to understand how we are going to solve these problems, and not just relying on government to do it for us. It needs to be the responsibility of every single capable adult in this country. We're not children, I mean, the government is our collective activity. And we vote for people to represent us and to pass laws based on meeting our needs. That's our collective activity. But that doesn't mean that we are no longer responsible adults who also need to take actions and to behave responsibility and to educate ourselves and to think about these things. Because how can we vote for policymakers if we don't even understand fundamentally what the policies are about or what the policy legislation will ultimately lead to? So I think it's good for us to be having these conversations. All right, so that's it for today, and I will look forward to seeing what you guys have to say about all this. And as always, if you're new to my channel, please subscribe. Click like on this video, ring the bell for notifications, share with friends and family, and I am so looking forward to reading your comments on this video. All right, so I will talk to you again soon. Bye-bye.